For the install on the Hybrid 3 shifter, you're going to need a 3/8 drive ratchet, a 1/4 inch drive ratchet, a long extension, a medium extension, a 1/4 inch drive 10mm socket, a 1/4 inch drive 1/2 inch or 13mm socket. You're going to need a 3/8 drive 15mm socket, a 3/8 drive or a 1/2 inch drive 18mm socket, a 10mm deep well socket, a 9/16 box end wrench, a 10mm wrench with a ratchet, a 1/4 inch drive T-handle or a Allen wrench type with a socket and a 1/4 inch, a 3/16 Allen wrench. You're going to need a razor blade or something to cut with, and some silicone based grease. On the 2015 and newer cars, you're going to need a 1/4 inch socket and a T20 Torx bit, which is the star shaped. Alright, so the first step installing the new Barton Hybrid 3 is that we are going to have to remove the shift knob and remove the center console along with the sound material and rubber dust boot that's in here. So the first step, I have our shift knob on here, but if it's your factory one, you're just going to unthread it. So I got the knob off. I'm going to take the chrome adapter off. Okay, so now we need to pop open the center console. And the next step is we're just going to grab right in the back of the console, anywhere you can really get your fingers, and we're just going to pull up, and they're just pop clips. So just work your way forward. And you're going to have a electrical connection here. There's just a little tab, just push that in and pull it out. So now that one's free, and now there's one more up here for like your traction control and hazard lights. Just take that out. And now kind of rotate the console and set it to the side. Now I currently have the Barton shifter already in the car, but for this aspect it doesn't really matter. I'm just showing you how to get the console and like the sound stuff out. So this is our factory sound insulation here, so I'm just going to pull that out. You'll have some white sound material in here instead of what I just pulled out. So you're just going to want to take that out. There's just a couple clips you pull off the studs, and then the sound insulation will come out. And now on our rubber dust boot, I have a zip tie from a previous install. So I'm just going to cut that off. You won't have to do that step, so I got it off. So all you're going to have to do with your factory shifter there is you're just going to start pulling the rubber boot up. And you're just going to pull it off. And now we're ready to go to the bottom side of the car. And now we need to go underneath the car. I have the transmission out of the car so that it'll be a little bit easier to show you and shoot the video. Alright, so when you're underneath the car and you're looking up, you're going to want to take a jack with a block of wood or a transmission jack or any type of thing to help support the transmission. So once you have your jack up and you have good support roughly in this area on the transmission, you're going to have 4 bolts here and here. You're going to want to take an 18mm socket and you're going to remove those 4 bolts, and then once those are removed, you're then going to lower your transmission jack or whatever you're using to help support the transmission. You're going to drop it down and you can actually remove it at that point. So that what we're doing here is basically dropping everything down. It's going to sag about 1.5 inches, and that's just going to give us more working room to get up to the shifter. Okay, once you have the 4 bolts removed and your transmission's hanging down a little bit, you're going to have 2 studs from the floorboard of your car protruding through this bracket here, and then you're going to have 2 nuts, one from each side, that you're going to need to remove. You're going to take your long extension with a 10mm deep well socket. We're going to remove the 2 nuts all the way off the studs. Once you have the nuts removed, you have a little retaining clip. You're going to need to kind of pull that off the stud, and then once you have them off the stud, you're just going to kind of work the bracket right off the shifter. And then we're just going to set that aside. It's not reused, but keep it with all your factory stuff. Once you have the bracket off, then we need to go back inside the car. Alright, so now we're back in the car, and what we need to do is remove the factory shifter here. We have 4 bolts that we're going to need to take out, and the reason we need to drop the shifter down and the transmission down first is because the floor pan is going to come around and actually block access to this bolt here. So by dropping everything down, we can now get to that bolt. So we're going to need to take a 10mm socket and a 6-inch extension and remove these 4 bolts. Once you have the 4 bolts out, just pull the shifter right on up. And nothing from this shifter is going to be reused, so just set it aside with the bracket. Once you got the shifter out, then there's 2 blocks here that we need to remove. I'm just going to pull them up. And on this one, there's a little lip on the front up here that a little rubber boot is attached to. So you're just going to kind of want to take the boot and pull it over the lip so that you can pull this one out as well. And then just set those aside. Alright, so once you're back underneath the car, what we're going to need to do is remove these 3 bolts here. You're going to want to use the 10mm socket. Once you've removed the 3 bolts, you're going to want to just take the casting and push up on the linkage. And then your casting is going to come out, and then just slide that up through the hole in the floor pan and set it kind of inside the cabin of the car. Okay, once you have your shifter box out of the way, the next thing we need to do is remove this arm. We're going to take our 10mm ratchet wrench and remove this bolt here. Okay, so keep in mind that you're going to have a floor pan here, and you're not going to have a lot of room, so this is kind of why you want the ratchet wrench. If you're having trouble getting this to clear the floor pan, have a friend pull down on the transmission, and it'll give you just enough for this to slide out. Then we're going to take this arm out, kind of just let it drop to the side of the drive shaft and remove it. Okay, the next step is to remove the linkage. You're going to have 1 bolt here. You're going to want to use a 13mm socket or a 1/2-inch socket. And pull the bolt up, and then we're going to discard this as well. Okay, now we need to install the Barton linkage. You don't need to transfer anything over to this linkage, it comes complete. But at this point you do need to decide if you're going to be using the trans mount or the body mount. If you're using the body mount, we're going to leave these 2 bolts out so that the linkage can pivot anywhere it needs to. If you're running the trans mount, then we need to add these two bolts. They're 5/16 button head, and make sure the lock washer is on there. Let's go ahead and install these. We're going to want to take the 3/16 Allen wrench and tighten them as tight as you can get them. Alright, so we got these good and tight, and now we're going to install the linkage and the shifter and do the trans mount. Okay, so these are tight, so now we need to take the bolt we took out from here earlier, and we're going to want to put the linkage on and then slide the bolt in. And there's not much room up here to work, and trying to get the threads to line up and have the bolt go through the hole can kind of be a pain, but just stick with it. And what you're going to want to kind of do is push the linkage, wiggle it, trying to get these threads started by hand. You don't want to just put the wrench up there and start forcing it down and strip something, so just keep wiggling it and trying to tighten the bolt. Eventually you'll get it. Okay, so we got that started by hand. Now again, you're going to want to take a 1/2 inch or a 13mm socket and tighten that on up. Get it good and tight. Alright, the next step is to install the main shifter housing here, and depending on your drive shaft and exhaust setup, you might be able to come through the side of your drive shaft and flip it right on over and in. If you have an oversized drive shaft or a different exhaust, it may be easier to come from inside the car and come through the floor pan opening kind of to the right of the drive shaft, and then let it come down inside underneath the tunnel hump, and then you're just kind of pull it back up. And then we're going to take the bolt that we previously removed, and again, you have the tunnel hump here, so if you need to, have a friend pull down on the transmission as you're trying to get this bolt started. A lot easier to do it like this than it is for you guys with the tunnel hump here, but you will get it in there. So again, start it by hand, and then we're going to take the 10mm ratchet wrench again, and we're going to go ahead and get that as tight as we can get it. Okay, once you have your shifter and your linkage installed, what we're going to need to do is take the 3 bushings, and there's 3 cutouts for these bushings. We need to make sure that they seat right in the cutouts. And once they're seated, they won't rock back and forth. So make sure they're in where they need to be and that they're not kind of off a little bit. You don't want to just clamp the clamshell right on top of the rubber, so make sure that they're seated where they need to be. And then we're going to take the bottom half of the clamshell here, and you'll notice that it has a square corner here and a radius corner here, so make sure it goes on with the radius and the square corner like it should. And then we're going to take the 6/4 inch bolts and start those all by hand. Also make sure that you have the lock washers on with the bolts, and then we're going to take a 17 7/16 socket with a long extension so you can get past the drive shaft, and it may be easier if you have a swivel on here. And then we're just going to snug them up. You don't want to tighten just one bolt, so you just get them all snug just so that they're all touching. And then come back a little tighter. And then go ahead and finish tightening them. Okay, once you have your clamshell bolted together, the linkage and the shifter all bolted, now what we need to do is remove the two outside bolts, and we're going to be using a 15mm socket for that. Okay, once you have the two bolts removed, take your block here and notice that there is a bigger step from here to here than there is from this side to here. This is going to be down, and the bigger step is going to go towards the transmission. If you are running our drive shaft safety loop, then the smaller step is going to go towards the transmission. So in this case, we're not putting on the safety loop, so the bigger step is going to go towards the transmission. So use the two supplied bolts. And again, just get them fingers tight for right now so that it can still move around a little bit. Okay, now we're going to install the two arms. Make sure that the O-rings are still there. During shipping they can kind of fall out, so then just put them back in place. They're just a square O-ring, so pop them right back on. Notice the arms is on this arm, it says drivers. I don't know if the camera is going to pick it up or not, but what we want to happen here are these two bolts to be facing away from the transmission. If you put this arm on the driver's side, what's going to happen is the bolt's going to be facing the transmission and you're not going to really have much access to the bolt. So we're going to start with the passenger side arm, and you're going to want to just slide it on the stud, and you want to come up so that this arm is coming to the side of the shifter. Because once we have this arm here, I'll just show you real quick, you try to slide it up and you're not going to be able to get it into place. So just kind of bring it up around the drive shaft and then put it on here. Take your 3/8 supplied bolt and start that by hand. And then we're going to do the same thing on the driver's side, and again make sure you bring it up so that it's coming through the side of the drive shaft and onto the side of the shifter. And start the other bolt. You may need to kind of wiggle stuff around to get it started by hand. Okay, once you have everything started by hand, you want to come back here, take a 3/4 socket or a wrench, and we're going to want to tighten the two bolts up that hold the block in place. Get them good and tight. And then once those are tight, again, just kind of wiggle everything around so that the arms can sit where they want to. And we are now going to take our 9/16 box end wrench, and this can be a little awkward coming up from the drive shaft with the tunnel hump here. but you're going to just go in like half turn increments and go ahead and just tighten those all the way up. One on each side. Once those are tight, we're then going to take a 1/2 inch or a 13mm socket, and we are going to tighten the ones down here. Alright, for the solid mount, the shifter body is mainly all installed, so what we'll want to do now is you're going to want to take your transmission jack or whatever you're using, and you're going to want to push your transmission back up, and then you're going to reinstall the 4 bolts, and you're going to want to leave those finger tight, and then check and make sure that on the bolt, the round portion of this bracket here should be lined up with the bolt, or the washer of the bolt. What tends to happen is once you drop the transmission down, it kind of wants to come over a little bit. So if the washer on the bolt isn't lined up with the arcs here, just take like a little pry bar, stick it between the tunnel hump and the transmission, and just kind of shove it over so that it is in line, and then finish tightening the 4 bolts here, and then you need to go back inside the car and we'll finish the install up in there. I'm going to remove this, and then we're going to go back to showing you for the body style mount. Okay, so I've removed the trans mount and we're going to look at the body mount, but before we do, right now we still have these 2 bolts that we left in from the trans mount, so this is a dead solid linkage, but I'm going to show you with this pin going through the gear selector rod here, it provides a little bit of slop, and this is all the movement you get here. That is not enough movement to run a solid linkage with a body mount. I don't care what anybody else says. That's going to apply force to this gear selector rod, and you do not want that. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these 2 bolts, and then we'll look at the bracket and mounting to the body. Okay, once again, I've removed these 2 bolts here. Make sure you do not have these installed if you are mounting to the body. So now the shifter is free to move where it needs to. So we're going to take our rear bracket, and we're going to make sure the bolts here face towards the rear of the car, and that this cutout here is facing towards the front of the car. And we're going to put that on the 2 studs sticking out the back of the shifter, and then we're going to pull the shifter up. You have the 2 studs sticking out of the floor pan. We're going to slide those up on the 2 studs, and you may have to kind of wiggle the bracket a little bit to get it lined up, and then you're going to want to put the 2 studs, or the two nuts back onto the studs. You're going to want to start them finger tight, and then once they're both lightly touching, just a wrist turn. You do not want to over tighten them, or you do risk the chance of breaking the studs off the car. So again, just wrist tight. Once you have your bracket on the shifter and that's all bolted up onto the 2 studs, you're going to want to jack your transmission up, and again, like I said earlier, make sure you start the 4 bolts by hand, and once it's in place, make sure that this arc here is lined up with the washer on the bolt, and you'll be able to tell right away if it's off one way or another, and then you're just again going to shove the transmission to line up the bracket arc here with the washer, and then tighten those up. And then we need to go back in the car, and we're going to drop the cartridge in and finish up the install of the shifter. Okay, so we have 2 springs, and I already put the spring pads on. You just put it on top of the spring, and you'll notice you have 2 holes here and here. So we're just going to take and put the springs in there, and again, this is an option if you want the heavier spring pressure. I recommend that everybody drive it this way for a little while. It'll take some getting used to because of the heavier spring pressure, but once you're used to it, you're going to absolutely love it. So we got the springs in here, and now we want to make sure the car's in neutral, and you can check that by making sure the gap is the same from front to back between the block here. If it's not, just take a wrench or something and you can just move this block. So then the next thing I like to do is I like to put all the bolts in the holes so that way you don't have to try to drop them in from above. And now when we install this, we want to make sure that this bolt is to the passenger side and that our stop is going to be towards the driver's side. So let's go ahead and put that in there now. Again, making sure that this bolt here is to the passenger side. Oh, and also this cup here, you see how it's kind of crooked? That's going to make getting it in almost impossible. So you want to make sure that you get that as straight on the shifter as you can. So just kind of straighten it right on up, and adding some grease around here will help it go into the cup as well. And it can kind of be tricky to get it lined up with the linkage there. Wiggle it back and forth so you'll see that it went down and the bolts are protruding up. That means it's in the pivot cup. So now I'm just going to go through and tighten up the 4 bolts. And again, it can be tricky getting it in that pivot cup. You might have to re-straighten it out a few times to get it to go. Okay, so we got all those tight. And now the next thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to set the first and second gear gate. And we do that by loosening the cap. So with the cap loose there, you'll notice that there's some movement here. So we typically send them right in the center of the slop. It should still go left or right from where we set it. The goal here is that you want to be able to lightly pull it into the gate and it still engage first and second, and pull it hard and it still engage first and second. So just to show you here, if I shove the cap all the way over, I'll just snug up one. If I go lightly, it still goes. Now if I pull hard, it still goes. So all the way to the left is fine. And let's try going all the way to the right. So lightly is fine. Now if I pull hard, it's still fine. Alright, so the next thing is we want to set our cap for our first and second gear gate here. And what I mean by that is when we come over to first gear, there's a stop on this side of the shifter, and then we go into first gear and we pull back to second. We can loosen the 4 bolts here and actually move the cap left to right. So the way you check it to make sure it's gonna work is, again, if we go loosely, it should still go into the gears. And then if we really pull on the shifter hard, it should still go into the gears. And if that's the case, then you're fine and you don't need to adjust the cap. If you find that you pull lightly and it won't go into the gears, then you need to loosen the bolts and kind of shove the cap to the right and tighten it back up, push the cap to the left, and then you want to double check it by tightening it up and then pull hard, and it should still go into first and second. Make sure it's tight. again, everything should be tight down here already. Alright, so the next thing we want to check is this cap, and we want to make sure that our first and second gear gate is where it should be. And again, if we loosen these 4 bolts here, we can slide this cap left to right. So you check it to make sure that you're actually lined up with the gate, and we do that by just lightly bringing it over to the stop, and it should engage first and second. And then you want to pull it really hard and go into first and second, and if it does, then you're fine. If not, you may need to loosen the bolts and set your stop. You have a little bit of adjustment left and right. So once you set that, go ahead and tighten the 4 bolts up, and then we can put our rubber boot on. So here's our rubber boot, and you'll notice this hole opening here in the bottom of the boot. We actually need to take this and stretch it all the way around this cap here. You know, it can be a pain, but we really need to get it around here, and that's going to help to seal out. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is take our rubber boot and put it on the shifter. You'll notice that there's a small opening on the bottom of the boot, and we actually need to take this opening and stretch it all the way around the top cap so that it seals the shifter up nicely, and then we'll tuck this part of it into the floor pan. But this is very crucial that you stretch this part of the boot all the way around the cap. So I find it's easiest if you just grab it. You're going to want to make sure your arrows are lined up front to back of the car. You're going to stretch it over this handle here, and then I like to start by getting it over the driver's side and then pull it on over to the passenger side. And hopefully the camera will show that it is indeed below this top cap here. So once that's on there, then we need to just start working the boot into the floor pan so that we can get a good seal. Okay, so once we have that into the floor pan here, now what we need to do is take this opening and we're going to fold it down, and then we're going to zip tie it. So just take it and kind of stretch it down. So the goal here is to get it below this round section and to about this angle cut right here. Once you have it there, we're going to take a provided zip tie, and go ahead and just tighten the zip tie right to it, and take our razor blade and cut off the excess. And now at this point you can re-put in your factory sound pad material. The one we have is pretty tore up, so I'm just going to leave that step out. But go ahead and put yours in. And then what we're going to do is take the provided pad here and then just kind of start shoving it around the shifter, working down into the console. And this stuff's pretty pliable, so you don't have to be real careful with it. Just start shoving it around, and then you can stretch it around this rubber boot. And you can even push down and like poke it past some of the studs if you want to. Okay, so we have that in there. And now the next step is just to pop on the console. And it's easiest if you start by lining up the front clips. Just like that. We need to come back, re-hook up our electrical connections. Just the ones that we did earlier. Once you have them all clipped in, go ahead and put this part of it back down on the shifter. Just start popping it back down. Okay, so the next step is to thread our chrome adapter down. Thread the shift ball back on. You could use your factory knob if you like. So you'll notice right here the shift pattern is not lined up, so we're going to unthread the ball. And then we're going to bring the chrome adapter back up until it hits the bottom of the shift ball. And then snug it up. And then you just want to make sure that you run through the gears, make sure everything still works. Go into reverse. And that concludes the install.